So I'm one of the leaders, authors for the implementation chapter. I highlight two key components of this chapter. So first, the aim of the implementation chapter is to provide a global overview of progress in implemented adaptation actions. So this complements the planning chapter, which looks at planned adaptation, and there's of course the finance components that look at what is already financed. And over the years, we've looked at different data sources, and this year we included three new sources of evidence. So one of them was looking at reports from completed adaptation projects that have been funded under the funds by the funds under the Paris Agreement. And here, looking at evaluation reports, we find that we actually see good results in terms of the extent to which those projects meet the stated objectives, yet only slightly over a half of these projects can actually sustain those results by the beyond the funding period of the project. So this, we see this as a key message, especially when we look at the issue about the design of the project. So how can we better design projects that can actually sustain results much beyond the project duration? Another evidence source that we looked at just to understand how effective adaptation is looking at reports from NAP implementation. So we already have a good overview of how many countries have NAPs, but we have a few countries that have already published reports that keep a record of how well they have implemented their NAPs. And we have good results, again, showing that countries, despite facing a lot of challenges, that they're making progress in actually implementing the programs and the priority actions they're prioritizing the NAPs. But the picture is less desirable when we start looking at the effectiveness, because we have countries, then actually the 5 that have gone into assessing the effectiveness of NAP implementation, they say it's ineffective and inadequate. And this is mainly two key reasons that were coming out was the issue with regard to the design of the priorities that have been included in the NAPs, but also the issue of the scale and depth at which adaptation is taking place cannot match the increasing risks. But just reflecting on the challenge that we've had in the implementation chapter of getting good coverage of data that we can actually use to assess adequately the effectiveness of adaptation, I think it just kind of reinforces one of the messages that has come up even about making sure that we are also supporting initiatives that can better support the assessment of adaptation effectiveness. So that is not just taking stock of actions, but how can we actually get into the assessment of their effectiveness.
My name is Patricia Nanteza from Kampala, Uganda. I have 2 questions for Lucy, and they're all solution-based questions. You've told us that from your findings, you found that maybe 50%, I don't remember the percentage, but projects are not designed to be sustained after implementation. Then what are the recommendations that you can give to countries and partners to design projects that can be self-sustaining? And you also mentioned that the scale and depth of implementation is not matching the speed of the impact of climate change or whatever. Then, other than finance, which we are all here for, is there any other solution that you can give to improve on the scale and depth of implementation so that it surpasses the speed of impact? Thank you.
Pettis from Equal Right Latin America. We work in climate and economic justice. So I heard about the importance on innovative solutions such as debt swaps. So I would love to hear if the report also mentions innovative mechanisms towards phasing out fuel extraction and production. And on the other hand, on allocation, if there's also recommendations in terms of community-led adaptation processes and governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So specific to the question around some of the recommendations that we can point out to make sure that we are designing projects that are self-sustaining. So in the chapter, we actually get into the details, highlighting maybe what are some of the best practices and maybe some of the principles that we can pay attention to make sure that the projects are not only effective in meeting their objectives, but can also sustain those results. And these some of the points that we've explained, and this is looking at how those those principles look like for better performing projects and those ones that will be performing poorly. So we have this kind of distinction. So for example, when you look at the issue of coordination and capacity building for implementing entities, so these projects, given that they are funded externally, you have to look at, for the government partners, for example, who are involved in the project, what type of capacity strengthening elements have been included in the projects to make sure that they have actually gained in terms of making sure even once the project has ended, they can go ahead and implement similar or other projects. There's also the issue of the role of local communities. I think this, even in the literature, is pointing out to the extent to which communities are involved. It determines the level of buy-in and also how well they can actually be able to integrate their priorities into these projects, and further how they can actually be able to keep focusing on those elements that have been included in the project even after the project has ended. On maybe also some of the pointers to improve the depth and speed of adaptation action so that we are enhancing the effectiveness. Perhaps two of the things that I can highlight is what had come up before, the issue of risk assessment, so that we are not only designing NAPs and projects that are aligned with responding to specific climate risks. And what is important is also paying attention to future climate risks, because most of the projects and some of the actions might appear to be quite business as usual. So we need to pay attention to what type of risks are we anticipating in years to come so that the plans and the projects we have in place are fit for purpose. But then the bigger point around monitoring, evaluation, and learning, continuously taking stock of how we are progressing in implementing adaptation to know what is working, what is not working, and what needs to be improved so that we have evidence-based kind of adaptation.